Hello, everybody. So I think this is the fourth lecture, chapter one. We left off in the last video. I think I spent a lot of time sort of rambling on about Sigmund Freud, but there were a couple things that I failed to mention that are mentioned on your handout. So I talked about his unconscious, but maybe you've heard the phrase Freudian slips. Freudian slips refer to when your subconscious, you're actually like accidentally slips out. So when you laugh at a joke that's not really funny, but actually kind of mean, or when you call somebody a name, like my mom often calls my daughter my name, and that would be in a Freudian slip because my daughter reminds her so much of me, so she says. Or memory blocks, like, well, you blocked something out. Well, why have you blocked something out? Because it's subconsciously too painful to remember, those kind of things. Those all are attributed to Freud. Okay, then you got Watson. You'll notice on your handout, on your chapter outline, that I have included dates. I've included their death dates. I do not expect you to remember them, but I really only included them so you can get a sense as to what time in American history and world history that they were significant. Right, for instance, Freud died during right around the Second World War. You have Watson, who died in 58, and then the next guy who is considered a contemporary didn't die till the 70s. Okay, Watson, behavioralism. So a lot of conventional and pop psychology is related to this concept of behavioralism. But behavioralism is a kind of psychology that says, I don't really care. The concern, the area of interest is not the subconscious, is not the structure or the function of consciousness, but it really focuses more on how people act, hence the term behavior, right? I'm trying to see here. So Watson. So if you scroll down here, or if you're on your handout and you've got some pictures down here of these little black and white images, this is from a fella named Watson. And the story, I think Watson's mentioned in your textbook too. It's a classic research project, and what Watson demonstrated was you could mold people's behavior. Specifically, what he did with the child, whose name was Albert, was he conditioned Albert to be afraid of something he wasn't otherwise afraid of. So the story goes is he had this graduate student who had a small child. He brings the small child into the laboratory. He gives the small child a fluffy, I don't know, some books say it was a rat, some say it was a rabbit, whatever. It was soft and fluffy. And the child is not afraid of the soft and fluffy, this white, soft and fluffy thing. Then he gives, and then the research involves him giving the white fluffy thing and ringing a very loud bell, which made the child startle, right? Which created fear. And he does this over and over again, gives the fluffy thing, rings the bell, and lo and behold, if the child doesn't develop a fear of the white fluffy thing. And so he demonstrated that you could learn to be afraid of something you were not afraid of. The story goes is that I think Watson, I looked it up one time, Albert died quite young in his 40s. And the story goes is that the rest of his life, he was even afraid of men with white beards because he had come to associate that white fluffy stuff with a fear response. Watson is also a great case in what not to do in psychological research. One, and why it would be unethical, and this will be a quiz question. Why is the research with Albert and Watson considered unethical? And one of the reasons is he uses children, and that poor little Albert did not give consent, right? He did not say, sure, I'll let you experiment with me and make me afraid of something I wouldn't otherwise be afraid of. So there are lots of rules associated with doing research with children. One is he created a negative outcome. So poor Watson didn't get to learn to not be afraid. He learned to be afraid, and then he never undid it, right? So Albert was always afraid. He didn't undid it. It's unethical because Albert didn't give consent, and he never undid it. What's the word for that? In the research, we call that, there's actually a word for how when you create some sort of psychological phenomena, you have to do it. I forget what the word for it is. Okay, but he's a behavioralist. Another behavioralist is this fellow by the name of Skinner. And Skinner is mentioned. He's a leading behavioralist according to your textbook. He is credited with something called an air crib, or I think they call it a Skinner box. So it's this image right here. And the air crib, so Skinner is supposedly claimed that if you gave him a child, right, at the very beginning of the child's life, gave him a brand new baby and said, this is what I want this baby to grow up and become, he could make that happen. He theorized that if you created the perfect environment with the perfect inputs, that you could make anyone become anything. And the air crib was a box, quite literally it's a box, and it's got these devices, these dials at the top that regulate the atmosphere and the oxygen, and basically you could kind of perfect outcomes. You could perfect the human condition. I read an article many years ago written by his daughter, and she said I was in an air crib and I turned out okay. So, but these are behavioralists, right? And this is what a lot of people want to learn about psychology is how can I control people's behavior? Behavioralism is a very popular field. It's used in marketing research. If you go into any retail store, the way the aisles are and the end caps and the colors, that's all behavioralism. The way discipline is used in schools, the way policies are written in your workplace, that's all based on these principles of behavioralism. That if you create certain environments or certain, that it will guide, it will control, affect, influence people's behaviors, right? How punishments and rewards and all those things are, that's all behavioralism. I think he also has Pavlov. Does your textbook also say that Pavlov is considered a behavioralist as well? I have a picture of Pavlov too. Yes, he is. So Pavlov is the famous guy that works with the dogs and the Pavlovian response. Okay, so that's this one down here. And that's got a little picture of Pavlov and his dog. But hopefully you've heard of him. Hopefully he's fairly mainstream. But what Pavlov, and I'm not going to get into conditioning and unconditional response. There's a bunch of letters in there and it gets really confusing. And you'll miss the quiz. I mean, I missed in grad school. I missed those quiz questions because I got the U's and the R's, all mixed up. But it works like this, is he would give the dog a bone. That sounds like a rhyme. And the dog would salivate, right? Because the dog is biologically programmed to salivate to food. He would ring the bell, nothing would happen. Well, yeah, bells are not relevant to dogs. He would give the dog a bone and ring the bell, and the dog would salivate because of the bone. He would do this over and over and over again. Eventually, all he had to do was ring the bell because the dog had developed a biological, he developed a response. He had a conditioned response to the bell because the bell had so often been associated with the bone. So he could condition a biological response. This is what happens if you have, trying to think. Yeah, some examples would be whenever I pick up the dog's bowls in my house. I have two dogs, an old Basset Hound and a big old Shepherd breed, right? And whenever I pick up the bowls, dogs know what's going to happen. They start to drool and they drip on my hardwood floors. That's a Pavlovian response. Or a little bit more PG-13 or R-rated, often our sexual response, the way our bodies respond to certain smells. Maybe that's the smell when we're with our lover and it causes a physiological sexual response, right? We get kind of randy because we've associated that a smell or a sound or an environment with certain inputs. In that case, it would be a sexual response. Oh my gosh, I'm getting close to my 10 minutes, right? Maybe if you smell something, you get sick to your stomach because you've associated those two things. Like for instance, my husband doesn't like the smell of vinegar because his mother used to clean with vinegar. So when he smells vinegar, he has this sort of unpleasant response. Food, smells of food maybe make you hungry. You weren't hungry before you smelled it, but now you're hungry because you've developed a physiological or a Pavlovian response when our body reacts a certain way. That's all behavioralism, right? Those things, those experiences. We had a dog one time. Actually, my mom has a dog that doesn't like newspapers. Whenever she sees newspapers, she gets scared because she's learned to associate that inputs change your behavior. And that is key with behavioralism, right? As opposed to psychoanalysis. Okay, 10 minutes, I'm going to stop. And the next slide, I'll get to talk about the humanist psychologist.